Hey piano players, this is Warren. In today's video, we're going to be talking about finger independence, what it is, why it's important, and how you can practice it. So what is finger independence? This is my loose definition. It's having control over each of your fingers to produce the sound that you want in terms of articulation and dynamics, and also being able to play at the speed that you want. Now, why is finger independence so important? You can think of it as the foundation to piano technique. You can think of the fingers themselves as a lever, and the other levers being the forearm and the upper arm. Additionally, the fingers have knuckles. You can think of those as hinges, and the other hinges being the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder. Not fully developing this is going to hold you back from your full potential when it comes to playing piano, and you're going to struggle when you get to more challenging music. And the worst case scenario is that it's going to lead to permanent injuries. If you develop this properly, it's the stepping stone to developing a fluid technique. You'll be able to not only play classical music with the appropriate style and articulation, you'll also be able to play things like trills with the proper mechanics, as well as playing more difficult and virtuosic passages. You'll have musically expressive performances, which is the end goal of piano technique to begin with. And this also lays the groundwork for further technical development, playing chords or octaves, as well as developing a wider range of motion when it comes to things like scales and arpeggios. Alright, so how do we practice this? And if you're familiar with this type of idea, you might be surprised that I don't recommend Hanon. It just seems like that's the default for a lot of traditional conservative piano teachers, but I myself have never enjoyed Hanon. Now, I'm not going to say not to practice Hanon because it has worked for other piano teachers, but it's not the only way that you can practice this, and I'm going to show you some different approaches in the rest of this video. Now, before you actually start practicing, there are two overlying concepts that I want you to keep in mind. The first concept is just keeping your fingers close to the keys as much as possible, and this is actually the first thing I was tested on in my audition to become a piano major. The second thing to keep in mind is having good hand posture. And what I mean by that is imagine your hand is holding a bubble underneath. This is in order to minimize tension and be able to play without any pain. You want to keep your wrist open because if you bend it too high up and bend it too high down, that's going to cause tension. And if you flatten your fingers too much, it's going to cause tension in your hand as well. Lastly, make sure to keep your hand and wrist as parallel to the keys as possible when you're playing. Now, one last thing to keep in mind is I don't mean to follow these rules 100% of the time. When you get to higher speeds and certain passages, it's actually impossible. So if your fingers lift off of the keys, it's not the end of the world. And when it comes to our fourth finger, our ring finger, it's kind of the odd man out. There's really not much you can do about it. It's just gonna feel weird, and that has to do with human anatomy. So make sure you don't pull a Schumann. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can just Google Schumann fourth finger. Always avoid pain. And lastly, it's impossible to avoid tension 100% of the time, as well as be relaxed 100% of the time. You just want to avoid tension as much as possible and be as relaxed as much as possible. All right, let's head on over to the piano. Okay, so this is the first way that you could practice finger independence, and this is by far the one with the shortest explanation. It's just to apply this idea to whatever it is that you're practicing. So if you're playing something like a scale, you can notice that I'm trying to keep my fingers as close to the keys as possible, just in contact with them as much as possible. I'm also keeping my wrist straight, and I have a nice little bubble underneath my hand. You apply the same thing with arpeggios, as well as chromatic scales, and even with music, like if you wanted to play Für Elise. One of the challenges to this approach, if you're going to use it though, is that it's really hard to stay focused, because if you're practicing the music, you're going to be concentrating more on the music instead of this idea of finger independence. Now, if that seems kind of distracting to you, then I'm going to show you a second approach, and it's to directly practice certain exercises on the piano. Okay, now I'm going to demonstrate some simple 5-finger position, finger independence exercises. Now, when I say simple, that does not mean easy. When I play it, it might look easy what I'm doing, but if you've never done something like this, it's going to be one of the hardest things you've ever done in your life. So we'll just begin with playing one finger at a time, one hand at a time, and just focusing on keeping your fingers in contact with the keys as much as possible. Just a simple scale-like pattern going up and down. When you get better at this, then you can do different patterns. And do that as many ways as you want. You could also try different keys, such as E flat major. And so on. And this is just one hand. We haven't even done left hand yet, so there's a lot of different combinations you can get through, and also doing both hands as well. Now, to make this a little bit harder, the next challenge would be to hold one finger down. And continuing to play different patterns as much as possible. You can work through each finger this way. And so on. Now, if you want to make that harder, you can do two fingers held down at the same time. I'm not going to work through every single combination because that'll just take forever. Now, what's after two notes is 3. And besides that, focus on practicing different ways. We already covered doing different keys, but you could also do repeated notes, different dynamics, and even different types of articulation such as legato, staccato, and then even portato, which is something in between. And when you get better at this, you can focus on speed. But remember that the faster you go, the more tension you're going to generate, and always keeping in mind that it shouldn't hurt. Now, when you get good at this, and let's say you're getting bored of practicing this way, and you want something more advanced, here's the only book that you will ever need. This is called Exercises for Independence of the Fingers. You can see it right here. It's by Isidore Philipp, and there's a lot of advanced exercises that you can do in here. And this is just one book. In my opinion, you don't need to get the second one. But the good thing about this book is that there's a lot of variety. You can just pick and choose whatever exercises that you want, and you take it and you transpose it to every single key. Okay, so I'd like to demonstrate now some exercises from this book. And something to keep in mind is that these are all fully diminished chords. Now, I'm gonna flip open the book and I'm just going to pick a random exercise. Okay, so this is page 15, just at the top of the page. This is the 10th series, all right? There's a lot of different exercises in here. Let me show you what this one looks like. Now, even at that tempo, which is not too fast, I could already feel myself tightening up a little bit. So be very, very careful with these exercises. Only working up speed if you can play with the least amount of tension possible. So that was just right hand. Let me pick a totally different one with left hand. So this is number 12 on the same page. And I'm just gonna do one of these because this is pretty hard. That's just starting on C. Obviously, you work yourself through every single one of these keys. So there is some variety here. You're not just stuck in the same position. A lot of these exercises will take you up and down the keyboard. Okay, let's do one last one. Let me flip to another random page here. All right, this is page 21, 16th series, exercise 1.
I didn't get that perfect, but you got the basic idea that, so you see here, they're making you hold the thumb, and that's just one combination. Now, one last thing I want to say about this book. I actually have seen a lot of comments when people refer to this exact book. They'll tell you to never play fast at all. And that's just not true. What's important is just to keep the same ideas in mind when we're talking about tension and relaxation. As long as you minimize tension and you maximize relaxation, you can work on different speeds. And if that wasn't the case, then he wouldn't have marked some of these tempos in this book at faster speeds, such as presto, allegretto, vivo, and of course we have speeds on the opposite end, a lot slower, like lento, adagio, etc.
Now, the third and last method that I want to share with you doesn't actually involve physical practice on the piano. You can think of it as a skill of observation. And I basically mean watch a lot of stuff. When we were doing in-person recitals, I always got this comment from my wife, who was also a piano teacher. She would say that the parents of her students would always remark about how my students played. And they specifically talked about their hands. Like, why did their hands look so good, so professional when they were playing? And when I thought about it, I actually had no idea that this was happening. And I couldn't really figure out why that was. Because for one thing, I hardly taught this at the lessons, but I started to put 2 and 2 together, and what I realized was it was because they watched a lot of my tutorial videos. So if you just watch a lot of high quality videos, tutorials, as well as performances, you'll begin to subconsciously develop this. So if you're doing this on your own, or if you can't afford piano lessons with a teacher, this idea is even more important. It's really going to be the most important part of your piano studies, because if you don't take this seriously, you're going to develop bad habits and improper playing mechanics. In my experience, it's always been easier to get a student from a complete beginner because I can teach them good playing habits right from the get-go. 99% of the time I got a transfer student, they already developed bad habits over years, and it was frustrating for them as well as me that most of our time at the lesson had to be spent trying to correct these mistakes. So if you do a lot of observation, I'm not going to say that 100% you're going to develop this, but it's definitely better than just doing it on your own. Over time, you'll get more experience and you'll begin to develop an idea of what good hand posture and finger independence is supposed to look like. And if you don't do this, you're going to unconsciously pick up bad habits. And the worst type of mistakes to make in life are ones that you are not aware of. Now, the last thing I want to say before this video is over is that patience is very important. Finger independence can take years, if not maybe a decade to develop. But in the end, it's worth it because it's the key that opens the door to a well-rounded technique. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit the like button. If it's your first time here, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this video. I'll see you guys for the next one, and happy practicing.